Hello, my name is George Faza. Today I will be talking about issues with the psychological disorders chapters in Canadian introductory psychology textbooks. This is a directed reading project that I worked on with the supervision of my professor, Dr. Jennifer Stamp. So, a little bit about me. I'm a fourth year international undergraduate student majoring in psychology at Dalhousie University, which is located in a small province on the east coast of Canada called Nova Scotia. The goals of this project were to review the coverage of mental health and the psychological disorders chapters in Canadian introductory psychology textbooks, and to recommend changes to address the gaps in the coverage of mental wellness, equality, diversity, and inclusion. The project plan consisted of 6 steps. We started by creating an annotated bibliography, then we wrote 2 sections of a summary table review, 2 sections of a topic sentence outline, and we ended it with an oral presentation. This project took us 1 semester from January 19th until April 5th. Following this format, which started off with being general and gradually becoming more specific, allowed us to hone in more on the issues we discovered and find possible solutions to them. We reviewed 5 books in total and focused most of our attention on Dalhousie University's Intro to Psychology textbook. It is currently in its first edition and it is an open source textbook. An open source textbook is an online textbook that is made available to be freely used by students and anyone else who wishes to read it. The benefits of making textbooks open source is that it increases access to learning because they are free to use. It is possible to include accompanying materials such as videos, and the content can be edited more quickly and tailored to fit the content of the course. In addition to this textbook, we also read other prominent textbooks used in Canadian universities, which you can see on this slide. I would like to highlight the first step in our project, which was to create an annotated bibliography. Here, we summarized interesting points we found from each textbook by forming a table, which included gaps we found in Dalhousie University's textbook, and through reviewing the rest of the textbooks, we discovered promising content to include. This is an example of the first row from the annotated bibliography we did on one of the textbooks. So we found, for instance, that they had a chapter called The Healthy Mind, which comprehensively discussed mental wellness. They also did a good job in representing the struggles of the Indigenous community with PTSD. So these were some topics we thought might be interesting to include in Dalhousie's chapter on psychological disorders. Creating such tables was useful for summarizing all the information we found and allowed us to focus on the issues we thought were important. But there's still some ideas that we included in the tables for the future if we wanted to tackle more topics. This also can be used as a starting point for another writer who wishes to take on a project like ours. Through reviewing the textbooks, we found 3 main issues that we wanted to address. First, intro to psychology textbooks tend to rely heavily on using the DSM in defining and explaining psychological disorders. And although the DSM is one of the most common tools currently used for diagnosis, it is not without criticisms. Some of its issues include a history of pathologizing normal behaviors, and its diagnostic criteria yield high rates of comorbidity in individuals suffering from mental disorders. The textbooks also do not discuss other potential tools for diagnosis, such as the transdiagnostic statistical approach. While the DSM mainly uses a categorical approach to describe mental disorders, so a disorder either exists or does not, the transdiagnostic dimensional approach describes symptoms as a scale. For instance, when looking at an emotion or behavior, it can be rated on a scale ranging from normal to severe psychological disorder. Second, we can see that most textbooks focus on mental illness and poorly discuss mental wellness. This is problematic as mental illnesses are portrayed as the default state of being instead of mental wellness. We can see this reported in statistics, in which, for example, authors would report that 50% of individuals who experience depression will experience it again in the future, without also indicating that there is a 50% chance of this not occurring. Textbooks also fail to define mental health altogether and phrase associations with disorders as generalizations. For example, receiving more parking tickets is associated with ADHD, but that does not mean that all individuals with ADHD will receive more parking tickets, and not all individuals who receive parking tickets have ADHD either. Such points are important to emphasize, as most readers of the textbooks are likely to be first year students who do not fully understand the science of research and interpreting results. The last main issue we identified is that we see little to no inclusion and representation of POC individuals and members of the LGBTQ plus community. And some Canadian textbooks also fail to discuss mental illnesses in the Indigenous communities of Canada. So, what are some potential solutions to these problems? It is important to describe other methods of diagnosis aside from the DSM, which uses a categorical approach. Thus, we should discuss methods that use dimensional approaches to identify mental illnesses. This could be a better representation of human experiences because, for instance, we all feel anxious or depressed sometimes, but it differs from one person to another in the intensity and duration, which is what might make an experience pathological. So you can see in the flow chart on the right, human experiences would be rated as a continuum rather than a category. Second, health should be defined as the attainment of a positive state of well being rather than defining it as a lack of mental illness. Mental wellness is the default state of being, not illness. Thirdly, discussing different cultural conceptualizations of philosophies of life, including topics like happiness, highlights cultural differences that we can learn from in the West. In Western countries, individuals tend to pursue individual happiness, while in some East Asian cultures, stability and peace are valued instead. Raising awareness that not all cultures live in pursuit of individual happiness might prompt some to change their philosophies in life and improve their mental states. Including Indigenous representation is also important in recognizing and highlighting their unique struggles, such as the generational trauma they experience because of Canadian residential schools. In Dalhousie's textbook, there is a section in the developmental psychology chapter that discusses the impact of residential schools on the developmental trajectories of the Indigenous populations. But there should also be a section that discusses Indigenous community struggles with mental illness in the psychological disorders chapter. Furthermore, when citing statistics, for example, if we are talking about depression, it is important to include the percentages of individuals who suffer from depression across different cultures. We do so with gender sometimes, in which we discuss whether men or women are more likely to suffer from a mental illness, but we do not always discuss these differences across cultures, races, and ethnicities. An example for this can be seen with depression, in which in secular Western cultures, females are more likely to suffer from depression than males. But this gender difference is not observed in other cultures, such as amongst Orthodox Jews and the Amish. Not including this piece of information makes the content not representative enough for all its readers. Furthermore, the LGBTQ community has unique experiences with mental illnesses that might not be fully understood. For instance, only relatively recently have we in the West become aware of the many genders that exist. This means that there isn't enough research conducted yet on non binary individuals. However, even mentioning that more research is needed and acknowledging the existence of non binary individuals in our psychology textbooks might make them feel more validated and included. Furthermore, although scarce, there are some studies that have focused on the unique struggles of some members of the LGBTQ community. For instance, we now know that gay men are more likely to suffer from eating disorders than straight men. We should include such information in our textbooks. Now, although we found three main gaps that we wanted to address, I would like to note that that does not mean that we have identified all of the issues in psychological disorders chapters. And we certainly were not able to overcome many of the limitations that we have faced while attempting to rewrite the chapter. We are only beginning to work on and consider all of these topics now. With the help of open source textbooks, we can hopefully share our work and our ideas more easily and build on each other's work while making the content we write more accessible to students and the public as science keeps progressing and hopefully becomes more inclusive and diverse in the future. Thank you for listening.